When I was first called into the ministry and I went in to talk with my pastor, who was one of the most phenomenal men of God I've ever known. Even after all these years, I've hardly met a person like him. I walked into his office and I said, Pastor Weaver, I've been called to preach. He turned around. Man, he was intimidating. About 6'6", silver hair, all back. Man. He looked at me, he said, boy, can you be alone? I thought he meant that if I preached the truth, people wouldn't like me. That's not what he meant. What he meant was this: while all the other boys are going on Christian ski trips together and running around in bachelor packs and doing all their little Christian stuff together and everything else, can you just be alone with God? When you grow older, does your wife know that although she has your heart, she doesn't have your heart of hearts? And there are times you get that look in your eye and she just has to step away because you're going to be alone. Because you belong to someone else and you spend your time with him. And churches, those of you who aren't pastors, know this. Yes, pastors ought to visit the sick and many other things, but some of your pastors will never be able to be what they should be because of you. You should encourage your pastor to be in his study, to be on his knees, to be praying, to be seeking out the glories and the beauties of Christ so that on Sunday and Wednesday or whenever he gets in the pulpit, he can tell you something that will warm your heart, like the road to Emmaus. Something about God. Now think about this. Some of you have been Christians for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years. But how much time have you actually studied who God is? How much time have you really considered what the gospel is? You see, you start learning things like the beauty of God is so great that if you were to catch one glimpse of His beauty without being supernaturally strengthened, it would melt your mind down to nothing and you would turn into an imbecile. That the beauty of God is so great that if He did not strengthen you, it would kill you to see the smallest fraction of it. The delight would overwhelm your heart and burst it. Those are the types of things that will drive a man and a woman out into the mission field. Those are the types of things that make martyrs sing because they know their God. The men and women down through church history that did amazing things, it was not because they were amazing people. It's because they saw something that most of us don't see. More of God, more of His beauty, more of His grace. How can you have the motivation to do what He says here, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice? It is by knowing more of who God is in Christ and what God has done for us in Christ. And the more you know that, the more you see it. The more you're moved. No one has to light a fire under you. You don't have to go to some conference somewhere to get all fired up. He is your fire. The knowledge of His beauty, His glory. That's what moves you. We live in such a superficial age, and I detest it when ministers and ministries try to reduce time with God down to some little thing of daily bread or 5-minute prayer or this or that. Those are not substitutes for truly walking with God. There is no substitute for time. And I'm not just talking to ministers. If you are to truly know the gospel, if you are to truly know God, you have got to realize you have a priority. Your priority is, as it says in Hosea, to press on to know the Lord. That's your priority. And in doing that, everything else will find its corrective measure.